and welcome to another decisions training video. Today we are going to be going over the post-to-flow handler. We're going to be going over what the post-to-flow handler is. We're then going to follow that up with why we want to use the post-to-flow handler. And then I'm going to show you how to configure the post-to-flow handler in decisions. So given that outline, let's jump right in. So what is the post-to-flow handler? Well, the post-to-flow is a type of flow behavior that allows for more flexibility when calling the entity via an API. Flows using this behavior can operate as a named user. You get to specify the flow context and how it's going to run, either as a named user or you can give them a session ID so that they can run as a named session. Therefore, you do not need to specify credentials when it comes to this particular flow behavior. The other thing this allows for is the arbitrary selection of data to be passed into the flow. The kind of data that you can pass in can vary because the way that this flow works is that it takes whatever the request body is and passes that out into the flow under a default type, rather than having to define specific input data. So this is where some of that flexibility I alluded to comes in. It is also necessary to perform certain functions in decisions. The key one that we will be discussing in this video is how to import file data into a flow. So we'll go over how you utilize the post-to-flow handler for that action. So why could you not just do this in a standard flow? Well, as I mentioned before, the post-to-flow has less restrictions than the standard flow when it comes to calling these entities as an API. The post-to-flow does not require input data defined. It has flexible data that can be passed in via the post-call body, whereas the standard flow does require input data to be set up and rigidly defined. This post-to-flow also captures metadata, such as headers in the API call, the URL that is being called, and other features of the call, such as whether it was a post call. The standard flow doesn't capture this information for you. Also, you can run the post-to-flow as a named session. You do not have this option inside of the standard flow. The standard flow will be run by whatever flow context has initiated it, either that being the system or the specified user. In some cases, it can be the named session if that's what you're utilizing in order to make that call in your API, but that information has to be explicitly spelled out in the body of the call. That is not the case for the post-to-flow. So how do you configure it? Well, it's not too hard to set. The first thing you need to do is create a flow. However, before you go in and just click your standard flow, you want to go down to advanced and then scroll down to post-to-flow handler. This will give you the flow with the properties that you're looking for. Secondly, you need to configure those properties, and those are going to be configured in the flow designer itself. You will have this additional drop-down selection in your properties that you would not see in your standard flow behavior. The first of these is going to be allow get and allow post. These just determine the methods by which you can utilize this flow as an API call. The next one is return results as JSON. You can return the results as a JSON object if you check this box. The next one is read form data. This allows the handler to receive values from form data of an HTTP request. If you are sending data as form data, such as files or form fields, to the flow, you have to enable this option. Authenticate via HTTP header option allows you to provide authentication credentials directly into the HTTP headers that are being captured in the flow data, typically using the authorization field. This means you do not need to include authentication information in the URL or the post body if you have this checked. Use named session is going to be referring to whether or not you want to use a named session to run this or use a flow as an account. So here, if you just click the little plus button you see there, you will get to specify the account that this flow is running as. If you check the named session box, you can run it as a named session. Below that, you have allow local machine to run flow. This is pretty self-explanatory. It allows this flow to be executed from the local machine. If this option is disabled, requests that originate from the local machine will not be able to run this flow. And then restrict by IP address. You can restrict the calls that are coming in to run this flow based upon the IP that is calling this. Okay, so after all of that is configured, you then want to check the view to see the URL. Typically, you have to configure API in the other flows and entities that you set up. But here, as this is designed to be called via API, you just click view and it's going to give you the URL that you'll need to call. Okay? So, I've gone over the 3 things I mentioned. I want to talk about something else real quick. And this is going to involve file data. All right? So when you are trying to pass in file data into a decisions flow, you need the post-to-flow handler to accomplish this. Otherwise, trying to pass in this information is not going to get captured correctly. So the way that you do this is that you set up the form input data inside of your post call. And you're going to specify the type to be file and select your files. All right? After that, you need to make sure that read form data is enabled, as I mentioned in a few slides ago. The little checkbox in the flow properties, that's what you need to check. And then after that, keep in mind that there is a 30 megabyte hard limit on receiving file data in this way. So now that I've gone over all that, let me show you a demo on how to configure this and to go over what I was talking about before with importing file data into decisions. All right, here we are inside of my decisions environment. I'm first going to show you how to make the post to flow, and then we'll go from there. So you'll click create flow, and you will find the post to flow under advanced if you scroll down far enough. Here it is right here. You can also search it in the search bar. I'm going to call this demo flow post, and then I'm going to hit create. Okay, so here we are inside of the flow designer, the post to flow handler behavior. The first thing I'm going to point out are the data explorer options. So in a normal flow, you're going to have your flow data, and you still have it here, but you also have 2 other categories of data, call data and extension data. Underneath the call data, which is of the type HTTP post data, you will find different information listed here. This is going to be information that is coming in from the external source that is calling your flow as an API. So the payload data is going to be a serialized string of all of the information that is getting passed in. The query string will be a data pair that is going to have the query that is being run to your post to flow if you have it set up. The raw URL is going to be the URL of the post to flow. The request headers will be a list of headers that has been passed in from the API call to the decisions post to flow. So if you have a header such as like bearer to handle a bearer token, you'll get that information in here. You have the user host address, the user host name. You have a Boolean that determines if the call was a post call. This is either true or false. And then you'll notice I skipped one, form data. Form data is the way that you pass in file data information into the post to flow handler in order to be utilized inside of the flow. So form data is going to have file data. It's going to have content type. It's going to have the name, the value, and then I want to go under file data because this is your decision's native type right here, right? You have a list of bytes as its contents, the file name, the file type, and the ID, as well as length and tag. So This is all the information that's passed inside of the form data that gets passed in with the call data. So this is a sub data structure of the HTTP post data structure. I'm going to go into the other one now, which is the extension data. This extension data captures information about this flow. So you see allow get, allow post, allow usage by the local machine, authenticate via HTTP header. You can specify which IP addresses are allowed to call the flow. Read form data if that's allowed, restrict by IP address, the name session ID. So you'll notice a lot of this information right here, but you don't actually configure it here. This gives you information about the properties of this flow. So when you create a normal flow, you are normally going to see these options, advanced and settings. Settings where you can set the behavior type, recursion policy. You have seen this stuff before. However, these are new, and these are exclusive to the post-to-flow handler behavior. So that allow get and allow post is determining what kind of calls you can make. Return results as JSON. You can choose to do that if you check this box. Read form data means that it will take in the form data underneath of the call data from the external API that is calling decisions. You can check if you want to authenticate via HTTP header. Once again, we have that over here under our extension data. Use the name session if you don't want to use a flow as an account. You can check if you want the local machine to be able to run the flow, and then restrict access by IP address. Now, this name session right here will allow you to override the use of this flow as an account, and instead use it as a created named session. I'm going to use an account to run this. As mentioned before, the account that you specify here is going to provide the context for which the flow is running. So these are my accounts that I've created. I'm going to select the admin account, and now this will run as admin whenever it gets called. The way that we call this can be determined by clicking on the view. So when we click this, a new window will open up, and that's going to provide for us the URL to in order to make our connection to this post flow. So here's the call via post. If we want to pass in the parameters that we see, we can do that over here. So as mentioned, this is a very lenient format. Whatever the payload data is going to be right here is going to determine what information is coming into this particular flow. You can also pass in information on whether it was a post call. The raw URL will get captured automatically, the user host name, the user host address. You can provide that metadata for this call. Okay, so I have copied. I've copied this URL. I'm now going to put it inside of my post call. Okay, so I have added an output to this post-to-flow handler flow so that we can see this information when we're done. And over here, I have configured a post call that is going to call the URL. I'm going to hit send, and we get our done back, indicating that this flow has run. Now, let's say that you wanted to pass in file data into a post call. How would you do that? Well, the way that we fetch that information is we'll go into our flow, and I am going to go to the properties. I have to make sure that read form data is set to enabled. And then I have my file that is coming into decisions. Now, note something right here. I am loading from file data to create a file reference. This is not required. If I were to put this information directly into a document viewer, into a file download, I can still pass that in as the file data. So I'm going to go in here and I'm going to do that so you can see how this works. I'm going to specify a file data type. I'm then going to pass in the information directly from here. And where it's coming from is going to be under call data, form data, first, file data, and then hit done. And we'll give this a save. Now, when I run my post call to get this information here, it's important that we pass in the file, right? The way that we can do that is by going to body, form data, and then I'm going to select the key to be file. And now that I've selected file, I can choose a file to upload. I've already chosen an image to upload. So all I need to do now is get the URL flow. We'll go to view. I'm going to fetch this URL. And then I will pass it into my post call. And when we hit send, there is the assignment. That's what I was looking for. This got sent out as an assignment. And now when I download that file, you'll see that it pops up right here. So that is how you import file data into Decisions. As mentioned before, there is a 30 megabyte limit to files uploaded in this way. Thank you all for watching. Hope this helped.